If you've been a victim of Giratina Lost Zone this past weekend at a cup or a challenge, this video is for you. Hey, Nick from NAIC TCG, and today we're going to be talking about Giratina VSTAR, and more importantly, how to beat it. Rolling through Twitter is like I feel like every person who went to a cup or a challenge did well with Giratina VSTAR, and it's a good card, it's a good deck, and we're going to talk about why, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to see more of this kind of content, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button. You can leave a comment and a like. Those things tell YouTube this is a good channel and other people should watch it. Let's go ahead. We're going to go to Trainer Hell. I have a link to it in the video description, and we'll talk about Giratina VSTAR, its place in the meta, its matchups, and what the deck looks like. So here we are, Trainer Hell, and before we look at where Giratina falls into the meta, I want you to see what the parameters I set for these filters, because you can change how the data looks, and I think it's important for you to know where I'm looking at it or how I'm looking at it. So here we go. The standard format, obviously, this is tournaments that have at least 30 players. I don't think a 6-person tournament really tells us much, so 30 players is I think good enough for like challenges and cups, things like that. And then we have the date range from July 10th to today, July 24th. And that's just a nice 2-week period, and it's all tournaments that were ran online. So here we are. The only decks that are highlighted right now are Giratina decks, and you can see in the last 7 days, this is also, by the way, I'm looking specifically at top 4 placement. So this is percentages of decks that fell into top 4, and you can see that Giratina in the last 7 days has done pretty well, being in the number 1 and number 2 spot. Number 2 overall in the final, in top 4. It's pretty good. Lost Zone is also doing really well in the last 7 days. Arceus Giratina is another deck that's seeing quite a bit of success. Being in the top 4 is a pretty, it's a good placement. There's nothing wrong with being top 4. So I thought instead of just showing overall, we'll show what, how these decks are or how often they're performing well in addition. So I think it's poised pretty highly in the meta right now. I think especially after this past weekend, we're going to see either more of it or more people trying to counter it. So why don't we go ahead, before we talk about how to beat the deck or what does well against it, we have to understand what Giratina VSTAR decks look like and also how they play. So this is a skeleton list generator, and this is also for top 4, all the same parameters, right? And every card you see on the left in core cards is present in at least 70% of all decks that fit into the criteria that we're looking at. So 70% or more of all decks that are in the top 4 for the past 2 weeks of tournaments with 30 players or more have these core cards, and then the other common cards are additional. So we have a list of 55 cards as part of our core card deck list. So that means you can bet money most of these lists that are performing well are going to look really, really similar. And it's not really surprising. I mean, the decks that do well are the ones that people are going to copy, and then they're going to play those, and if they're good decks, they'll continue to do well. So it runs just like a Lost Zone deck. And because it is, right? It's a Lost Zone deck that features Giratina VSTAR. Now, Comfy, Cramorant, Sableye, those are things, Radiant Greninja, those are cards that we are all ideally very familiar with. And if you're not familiar with them, very briefly, the idea is to use something like Comfy, Chorus's Experiment, things like that, to allow you to put cards into the Lost Zone, which is basically banished or exiled. Once a card goes to the Lost Zone, it cannot be used or recovered at all for the rest of the game. So you put cards into the Lost Zone using things like Comfy, Chorus's Experiment. This deck does not run Lost Vacuum, but it is one of the other common cards. So things like that will put cards into the Lost Zone. Why do we put cards into the Lost Zone? Well, by having more and more cards into the Lost Zone, we unlock additional effects on our other cards. So Cramorant has an ability that says if you have 4 or more cards in the Lost Zone, you can use its attack for no energy requirement. It just can attack for free. And it does 110 damage on a basic single prize Pokemon. It's pretty decent for no energy. Mirage Gate is one of our trainer cards that if we have 7 or more cards in the Lost Zone, Now we can go ahead and search a deck for 2 basic energies of different types and attach them to our Pokemon in any way we want. And this is really useful for something like Giratina, because Giratina does need to attack for a Grass Psychic Colorless. So we can go ahead, attach any energy from our hand for turn, and then we get to utilize something like Mirage Gate to meet the Grass Psychic requirement for the attack. And now we can attack even if we had no energies on our Giratina to start. So really powerful card. And then of course, when we get to 10 cards in the Lost Zone, we have 2 different things that happen. One, Sableye has the attack Lost Mine for a single psychic energy, which is absolutely stupid. Then we get to put 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you want, and we have virtually no real good way, or no way of that's seeing play of stopping that effect from happening. Is really, really strong, really annoying. And then the other thing that happens is Giratina VSTAR. It has a V-Star power, which is an attack, so it's not even turned off by Path to the Peak, called Star Requiem. And if you have 10 cards in the Lost Zone, and you use the attack for just Grass Psychic, which we already talked about is covered by Mirage Gate, you just knock out the opponent's Pokemon. It's just knocked out instantly. It doesn't matter how much health it has. It doesn't matter how much damage reduction it takes. It doesn't matter. And nothing. It's just instantly knocked out, and you take the prize cards, and it's really, really powerful. So why does this deck, why is it so much better, or why is it doing really well, and especially recently? And one of the reasons is Giratina V's attack Abyss Seeking. For just a colorless energy, we can look at the top 4 cards of a deck and put 2 of them into the Lost Zone. That means on turns where we normally wouldn't be able to get much done, we can still now use Abyss Seeking to go ahead and accelerate getting cards into the Lost Zone. That means on a turn where we use Comfey twice in the Colress, now instead of getting just 4 cards into the Lost Zone, Abyss Seeking lets us get 6. That means we are so much closer to getting 10 in the Lost Zone for something like Sableye, for 7 for the Mirage Gate, 10 for the Star Requiem. There's a lot of really good uses for something like Abyss Seeking. Plus, we get to build our hand up in the process. We look at the top 4 cards, and 2 go into our hand, which is really good, right? Anytime you can build a good sized hand and you can start to develop what we call card advantage is a good thing. So the idea of card advantage is that the more cards I have in hand, especially if I have more cards than my opponent, I can make better informed decisions about things like what I want to Lost Zone, the order in which I do things, and just the number of overall plays I can make are higher potentially because I have more cards in hand, more options, more things to do, more ways to search, more ways to draw. It's just having more cards in hand is good. That's why things like Professor's Research is such a good card. We also make use of things like Battle VIP Pass because we have cards like Iono and Comfey. We can go Radiant Greninja. We can see a lot of cards in a single turn, which means if we have a really bad starting hand, we can play Iono, shuffle our bad hand to the bottom of the deck, and then draw 6 fresh cards. And then we can use Colress to look at the Comfey to look at the top 2. And then we can use another Comfey to look at the next top 2. And we can use Radiant Greninja to discard an energy, draw 2. We just looked at 12 cards, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's like 12 cards, plus our top deck is a nice baker's dozen. That's a lot of cards in a single turn for just one supporter and a couple of switch cards, things that we have a lot of. We have a lot of switch cards, we have Escape Ropes, we have Jet Energy, which is a very, very useful card in this deck. And Jet Energy is a pretty new card. It came out in Paldea Evolved. Attach it to one of your benched Pokemon from your hand, and that Pokemon moves from the bench to the active spot. Which means if we have a Comfey in the active and 2 Comfeys on the bench, we can go ahead, use Flower Selecting on the active Comfey, look at the top 2 cards, put 1 into the Lasso and 1 into our hand. Then we attach a Jet Energy to Comfey number B, or letter B, on the bench. We move it into the active, and we Flower Selecting. Now we have an energy on that Comfey, we can go ahead and retreat by discarding the Jet Energy and go into Comfey number 3, or letter C. Since I started with ABC, we go into C, Flower Select, and we've only played 1 energy, and we just did Flower Selecting 3 times. We just put 3 cards into the Lost Zone, drew 3 cards, and all we've done was attach a single energy. We haven't used a single switch out yet. That's really, really powerful. It also benefits from Path to the Peak. I mentioned Battle VIP Pass, and I didn't really finish my thought, is the idea of finding a Battle VIP Pass between Iono's and Culver's and Comfeys and Radiant Greninjas is really easy. You can dig, we just went through a very realistic example of how we can dig through the deck very quickly, very easily. Playing Iono, we find our Comfeys, we find a Jet Energy, and there we go. We just saw a ton of cards. All we did was play one supporter and one Jet Energy, one energy. And we really didn't do much. 2 cards, not a lot. So finding Battle VIP Pass is pretty easy. We also make use of Path to the Peak, which is a very powerful stadium for turning off all other Pokemon with Roblox's abilities. Sure, we're going to turn off our own Radiant Greninja, but if it means that our opponent's Lugia V-Star can't use Summoning Star to get the Archeops in play, well then awesome. Radiant Greninja doesn't matter that much anymore, since we still have draw power through Comfey, Culver's, and Iono. So, really useful Path to the Peak right there. It's going to turn off things like Mew and Genesect. It's going to turn off Arceus. There's a lot of really powerful cards. Chien-Pao is Palkia, both of them pretty common cards. Turns off something like Ting Lu. So a lot of really useful, or a lot of competitive cards. They get impacted by Path to the Peak. Gardevoir EX and Radiant Greninja in Gardevoir decks. There's just so many uses. We're going to have a couple of Boss's Orders to pull things up and just beat them over the head with something like Lost Impact. Lost Impact is the main attack for Giratina V-Star. We haven't even talked about it yet. Grass Psychic Colorless, it does 280 damage. 280 damage. That's just one-shotting every single Pokemon V-Star. Every single Pokemon V-Star is getting one shot. And if you do go against something like a VMAX, for example, we have like Mew VMAX has 310 health. We have a Choice Belt in the other common cards. And now that 280 becomes 310, and you just instantly knock out a Mew VMAX. So what you do is you Star Requiem, and then the next turn you attach Choice Belt, and you go Lost Impact, 310. There you go. There's your 6 prizes. And because they'll probably have Mew VMAXs on the bench, and they might want to attack with Meloetta, we do have Cramorant to knock out the Meloetta. We have Sableye to knock out Meloetta. We have Giratina V if we want to attack with a different V before whatever, or we attack with a V Evolve. We have Radiant Greninja. We have a lot of options for dealing with something like a Meloetta, plus our 2 Boss's Orders. So escape ropes, things like all these. There's a ton of things we can do to deal with something like Mew. We have Drapion as a potential other common card. I'm not sure if it's really... Not sure Drapion's really worth using or having right now, but if you are at a local meta where Mew is very popular still, it might be worth including. It's just it's a win. It's a free win card against Mew, especially in something like Giratina. Though, like I said, not in a regional setting unless you are super convinced Mew is going to be really popular. Probably not needed. Heavy Ball is not a bad inclusion. Clara's not a bad inclusion. Pokegear, Energy Recycler. These are all really useful cards, and then ultimately it's going to come down to you or the individual who wants to play this on what they value in their Giratina list. Now remember, you are probably going to have to discard a couple of energies between Radiant Greninjas and Hard Retreats. So the Energy Recycler might be bad, might be useful, might not be bad is what I wanted to say, for recycling the energies into the deck. With Mirage Gate, it is worth noting that Lost Impact does require you to Lost Zone 2 energies. Doesn't matter where those 2 energies come from, but 2 energies from your side of the field have to go into the Lost Zone, which is another cool thing that it builds the Lost Zone even faster, so you can start attacking with Giratina. You go ahead and get a couple of cards into the Lost Zone between Comfeys and Culver's, and then you Abyss Seeking, and the next turn, Comfeys, Culver's, and then you can go ahead and Lost Impact, get a couple more cards into the Lost Zone while attacking and progressing your board state. It's really, really useful. So that's kind of how the deck works. It has the Roxanne. Usually they run 1 copy. Some people are running 2. Some brave soul is running 3. And oh boy, I don't know how you do it. 3 Roxannes, it's absurd to me, but it's really useful for the Giratina, Gardevoir, and Lost Zone matchups, because Roxanne kind of crushes them, especially Roxanne Path Prey. Doesn't really get any stronger than that. So that's kind of the list that we have here. It's really solid, really good. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the matchups that Giratina, we'll just take a look at some of the matchups. We're not really going to talk about Arceus Giratina too much. It's an Arceus deck, and now you have Giratina, and it functions the same way every single Arceus deck does, in which case it's go ahead and use Arceus V to power up your V-Stars, and then just Star Burst to help make that happen. Arceus V-Star, again, Trinity Nova is really, really good, power up those V-Stars, and then you just path and hit with Giratina V. If you want something that is easier to play than Lost Zone Giratina, Arceus Giratina is a pretty good deck. We saw that it's doing well in the top fours. It's finding its place into the top fours. It's a very linear, straightforward deck. Arceus, Trinity Charge, Trinity Nova, depending on if you're going first or second. Power up your Pokemon. Those Pokemon start attacking. You put down Path and Judge, and then you that's it. That's all you do. It's really, really easy to play. And because it's super strong, relying on Path of the Peak and Judge, Iono, you can really just completely lock your opponent out of the game right from the start. So there's your Arceus Giratina coverage. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at the matchups for Lost Zone Giratina really specifically. Again, we can take a quick look at Arceus Giratina. I guess we'll just start there. So this is the matchup win percent for Arceus Giratina. It's going to beat Arceus Duraludon a lot because you just hit super hard. You don't really rely on special energies. So there we go. You can beat Chien-Pao. That's fine. There's a lot of matches played. You beat them pretty well. I don't know. It's important that we talk about matchup data actually first. Some of this matchup data doesn't matter, whether it's because it's really low games played or because we're playing against a deck that might not be built optimally. People aren't familiar with how to play these decks yet. Like Chien-Pao, for example, is really Ting-Lu. Maybe we just don't have the cards necessary to make Ting-Lu really good. Maybe people aren't playing it very well. Maybe the deck just isn't, like I said, it's not there just yet. So keep some of that in mind. You don't know who you're playing against in these online tournaments. They're often best of one, so that does change things. This isn't a be-all, end-all for how, for matchup data. It's just something to keep in mind. Anyway, Arc Giratina, it beats Duraludon, it beats Chien-Pao. Pretty good against Mew, pretty good against Gardevoir. Lost Zone Box, just because Arceus decks tend to usually do well against Lost Zone decks. You lose to Lugia, you're pretty neutral against Ting-Lu, which is something I didn't think I'd ever have to say. And then you lose to regular Lost Zone Giratina box. I said that usually Lost Zone decks are good against Arceus, and this is one of the examples where it's not, because you have the Giratina to just one-shot all your opponent's two prize Pokemon like the Arceus and the Giratina. Meanwhile, you can force them to take one prizers, like the Sableye and the Cramorant and stuff like that. So, yeah. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Lost Zone Giratina matchup. And you can see it's a lot less, there's a lot less losses happening here, at least according to this data. So some of your best matchups are Fusion, or your hardest matchups, I should say. If you're trying to beat it, it's the best matchup. Fusion Mew, Inteleon Urshifu, and the Single Strike Lugia Lost Zone box. There's like a few things that you're like pretty neutral with, and it's just a matter of, do you path them out of the game? Do you get to go first? And that's just really helpful. Do you, does your opponent, and especially like the Single Strike Lugia, do they just fail to set up? Do they know how to play it? Are they putting down an Urshifu when they shouldn't? And they're just not utilizing Tyranitar properly? Are they putting down their two prize Pokemon too soon? There's a lot of stuff that goes into, again, this matchup data, something you should keep in mind. But you're going to beat Ting-Lu pretty easily. Who doesn't? Yeah, I guess Chien-Pao doesn't. You're going to beat Gardevoir. You're going to beat Chien-Pao. You're going to beat Arceus Giratina. You're going to beat Arceus Duraludon. Some of these numbers are pretty good. 207 matches, 80 matches, 166. I mean, like, there's some pretty good numbers behind here. And the higher the matchup count, or the number of matches played goes, the more confident I feel in the data. But still, there's always those caveats that we mentioned. So really, what is the best thing to go ahead and actually beat Lost Zone Giratina? And the answer, unfortunately, there's not one. I mean, the answer, I guess, technically, if you want to look strictly at hard data, would be Inteleon Urshifu. It has the worst matchup against. and that's not even that much. It's 48 as far as I'm concerned. It's pretty neutral. 52% win rate is pretty neutral as far as I'm concerned. It's really just a coin flip away from who's going to win that. So if you want to beat Giratina Lost Box, Inteleon Urshifu, Single Strike Lugia, Lost Zone Box, Fusion Mew, decks that are established as good top tier powerful decks, why does Inteleon Urshifu win? Well, they can wreck the bench with Urshifu, and then the Inteleon VMAX is really difficult to deal with when trying to use those single prizes. They chip away at all your Pokemon with something like the Double Gunner. They can Cheryl all that damage away. So even, I think Inteleon has 320 HP, which means you can't one-shot it with the Giratina VSTAR unless it already has damage counters on it. So then they just Cheryl that away, and then you did all that for nothing. You lost on 2 energies you no longer have access to, and they took no damage because they were able to Cheryl. That's one of the reasons why Inteleon Urshifu can beat it. Single Strike Lugia can beat it because Lugia is really good. It can accelerate energies and power things up out of nowhere. So Tyranitar can hit crazy high numbers. Tyranitar can very easily hit 280 damage. It's a 2-prize Pokemon, but it's a basic Pokemon, so I don't have to evolve it, which means I can just slap it on the bench and retreat whatever's in the active, and all of a sudden I'm one-shotting your Giratina VSTAR. Especially if you only have one in play, it can be kind of problematic. I'm going to be able to one-shot your Giratina Vs very easily with something like a Lugia, with an Urshifu, with a Tyranitar, very, very easily. So as long as Lugia sets up, it can be really, really challenging. Lugia Single Strike is my deck of choice. It's what I'm going to be playing until I can't play it anymore. But and then the last one is Lost Zone Box. You know, you do lose. It's just a pretty close matchup, and that's just a matter of who's able to utilize their Lost Zone stuff first. Is the Giratina, and that's, like I said, really it's gonna come down to who can get 10 into the Lost Zone faster. Which version of Lost Zone are you playing against? Are you playing against one that's pure Turbo Lost Zone? Are you playing Lost Zone Stones, where they have a bunch of Pokemon V, they have a little bit more health, they give up more prizes? Do they know how to play the Raikou and the Dragonite, when to play them, all that kind of stuff? There's a lot of stuff that happens that goes into this, and we can differentiate Lost Zone from, like I said, Turbo versus Stones, and maybe one has a better win rate than the other. This doesn't split them, unfortunately, but all things to consider. Or you can go ahead and play something like the Mirror, but if you don't want to play a Lost Zone deck, because they can be very tiring, very challenging to play, Fusion Mew is another pretty good option, even though not going to advocate for Mew, so we're just going to skip that. And I'm going to say your best answers are either one of the bears, whether you're going to go Rapid Strike Urshifu with Inteleon, or Single Strike Urshifu and Tyranitar with Lugia. Those are the 2 decks that I would recommend for beating Lost Zone Giratina. So there you have it. Everything you really need to know about Lost Zone Giratina, how well it's been doing lately. It's, are you likely to encounter it, what the deck looks like, its general strategies, and some matchup data so you can better pick or best pick the deck that, if you're concerned about Lost Zone Giratina, now you have some ideas or some better idea on what to play to beat it. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, found it informative. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, all kind of stuff tells YouTube this is a good channel. Other people should watch it. Let me know what deck is giving you a problem, and I can do a full breakdown on it, just like I did for Lost Zone Giratina. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. I want to give a special shout out to the YouTube members Black Wins, Mike the Highest, Fernando Ortiz, Chin Pokemon, and Eric N. Thank you all so much for your support. It really means a lot to me. And if you want to become a channel member, you can go ahead and click the channel member button somewhere at the bottom of the page. I'm not really sure. I haven't done it myself.